Ladies and gentlemen, welcome on board. Your tray table must now be stowed, armrest down, window blinds open, and seatbelt fastened. We wish you a pleasant flight.
Good day, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all to A4E's 5th Annual Aviation Summit. Looking at today's program, which I'm sure you've taken a look at that already, we can promise you some exciting discussions and interventions on what's driving us today. A4E is celebrating its 5th anniversary this year. I must admit, it's been quite a ride since 2016. Overall, quite satisfactory with what we have achieved over this half decade. But it's obvious that we all wish we could have celebrated our anniversary in better circumstances. Diverging EU travel restrictions and the slow start of vaccination process in Europe last year have led to European airlines being the worst affected market globally, as you can see from this chart. On top of that, the forecast tells us that still today, despite Europe's rapidly increasing vaccination process and rollout, we are still seeing the impact of travel restrictions, putting airlines at a competitive disadvantage vis-à-vis other markets. To make things worse, Europe's carriers will also have to shoulder financial burdens of lost ANSP revenues, in part due to the mismanagement of ANSP's costs. While air navigation service providers' service requirements fell by 60% last year, they opted to reduce their cost by only 1%. These monopoly air navigation service providers, as I would call them, they will pass on some 5.4 billion euros to airlines through higher ATC charges at the beginning of 2023. That's coming soon. This is truly unprecedented, and it will weaken the airline's chances for a quick recovery and potentially also affect the industry's planned investments into sustainability, which is not unimportant. Just like the airlines would never ask their passengers to cover their losses, member states really should not ask airlines to cover theirs. This slide is, as you've probably seen it before, it's one of Eurocontrol's latest slides on the recovery trends of traffic, and it looks at 3 scenarios. At the heart of these 3 scenarios is very clearly the future trajectory of vaccination levels and the virus. Scenario 1 is the best scenario, so that's the top blue line you see there, and is the one, of course, we are really hoping to see today develop further this summer and later this year. This scenario sees the easing of travel restrictions with the summer of 21 and recovery to 2019 levels, according to the best scenario, we will only see by 2024. The second scenario, less optimistic, is really taking into account easing of travel restrictions only by the first quarter of next year, which means that we'll see recovery vis-a-vis 2019 levels only by 2025. And a third scenario, let's hope and pray to God that this will never happen, but this takes into account lingering infection, low passenger confidence with a recovery to only to 29. So in terms of, in the middle of so much uncertainty, as A4E, we did our utmost to support our members with very dedicated and focused actions on everything from slots relief to deferral of ATC payments, and of course helping airlines to restart last summer through dedicated input on the IATA and ECDC health and safety protocols. There is a lot we can be proud of, but just as many challenges still lie ahead. Let me just go through some of these. First of all, on slots. We appreciate the European Commission's action on slots relief last year. It's very positive. The waivers for summer and winter 2020 were really essential, now it turns out, to help us through the crisis and preserve connectivity and competition for European consumers. But the Commission's proposal for summer 21, however, did not fully align with the global industry recommendation. That's the recommendation of the Worldwide Airport Slot Board that A4E had actually advocated for. The Council and the European Parliament improved the final package of measures for summer 21, but it still created complexity for European airlines, especially since the non-EU markets, and the US market is a very good example of that, either extended fully waivers or adopted the global recommendation. And the slot relief may not have been sufficient. New variants and travel restrictions continue to disrupt air travel in Q1 and Q2 of this year. And in May and June of this year now, it became necessary to apply the force majeure clause in the regulation for those who are familiar, but I will not enter into much more detail. So what's still coming up under slots? Well, for the winter season 21, decisions need to be made soon, very soon. And the Commission can set a slot usage ratio between 30 and 70%. Just as a reminder for all of you, normally it would be 80%. But though there is a renewed optimism, I think today that Europe will have a later than usual summer peak, airlines are predicting traffic could plateau again after this summer. So both Eurocontrol and IATA forecast that air traffic in Europe will see a gradual recovery to only, compared to 2019 levels, only 50% of 2019 levels by the end of 21. So there is improvement in forecast, but it's not that huge compared to last year. So there is still a lot of uncertainty. You know, vaccinations are expected to reach desired levels by the autumn in the EU, but will not have done so in other regions. And we're a global industry, so it does affect us what's happening in the other regions, of course. We hope not, but new COVID variants may well emerge, requiring short notice restrictions. Demand will come back unevenly across the markets and segments, for instance, corporate versus leisure, and international long-haul traffic will continue to be limited. So basically, unevenly, demand will come back unevenly across the markets and the different segments, as I mentioned before. A4E, therefore, on this issue, this challenge of slots waiver, supports a 30 slots usage ratio for the winter of 21, as well as, and this is important, as well as flexible retime and rescheduling opportunities within the current legislation, to facilitate sustainable and efficient schedules for passengers and airlines. The next item is deferral of ATC charges. Yes, I think we were successful to a certain extent in obtaining the deferral of en route ATC charges, the payment of those charges for part of 2020. But what's still pending? What still needs to be done? The point is actually very simple. Why should airlines pay for a service they are being prevented to use? Maybe we should completely rethink the funding of air navigation services in the future. Of course, it would require global change, but the crisis really showed that the system has its difficulties and its flaws. The next item then on safe and efficient transport. Cargo has been doing relatively very well, but it also has proven to be very essential throughout this whole crisis. And in particular, in the spring of 2020, when the member states were simply closing their borders one after the other. A4E Airlines, just to give you a few numbers, have flown around 107,000 tons of PPE, including 5 billion masks in 2020. 21 A4E airlines have were heavily involved in COVID-19 vaccine transport. And A4E has supported to set up the EU green lanes, working closely with the Commission in order to facilitate freight transport throughout the EU, limiting queues at the borders. We have also supported the development as well as the implementation of the IATA ECDC aviation health and safety protocol. And we have kept working continuously with the authorities, both at the EU and the national level, to ensure safe travel throughout the pandemic. We have worked also with airlines and IATA in their drafting of guidelines on transport of COVID-19 vaccines and the use of passenger aircraft for freight, the so-called freighters as we know them today. Air cargo demand is now higher than before the crisis. Again, very good news. So it was key to be able to support a segment of the industry in Europe, cargo being key to the European economy. As we do move on to the future challenges ahead, so what are the main challenges ahead? To simplify it maybe, but it's important to focus here is, first of all, return to restriction-free travel. Though we haven't really won the battle yet in getting rid of all travel restrictions, it's quite clear this is the beginning, we're optimistic. But A4E, together with aviation transport and tourism associations, have really welcomed very hard the Commission's digital COVID certificate, which was launched recently, as you know, and which member states are currently working on to implement. And we're actively working with the Commission services since quite a while, as well as with the national authorities, to ensure that implementation of the certificate can take place smoothly and help restore freedom of movement within the EU. But as ever, the EU member states must do their part and implement the recommendation as is, without additional restrictions on certificate holders. So what still needs to be done? I think that's quite clear. We will need to continue to work closely with the authorities to ensure that antigen tests are also recognized throughout Europe for travel, and that EU funding is made available for free and affordable testing. This will indeed benefit travelers. For example, Belgium, my home country, announced last week it will offer 2 free PCR tests for those who want to travel as non-vaccinated persons. But those are free tests, so I think Belgium is giving a good example here. Our goal is to ensure that travel restrictions are lifted as soon as possible. Certificates and passenger locator forms, so the notorious PLFs, should not become the new norm in EU air travel. So this is something we're very clear about. The next challenge ahead is what we call is the challenges around Destination 2050. I'm sure that you know that in February of this year, A4E launched together with the associations representing the European airports, the European regional airlines, European ANSPs, and the OEMs, launched Destination 2050, which is basically a roadmap that explains how we as an entire aviation sector in Europe will get to net zero by 2050. It is really a groundbreaking commitment for the entire EU aviation sector, and which is a commitment which you will see up to the highest level to implement this roadmap to achieve net zero by 2050. As we move on now, so what are we looking at as we get out of this crisis? At A4E, we believe, and I strongly believe personally, that one of Europe's biggest achievements for the past decades has been the single aviation market, liberalizing the market with all the benefits to the consumer as a result of that, connecting more people to more destinations at affordable prices. That this challenge must be taken up after the crisis, and again, take things up where we left before the crisis. So one of them is restoring freedom of movement. I think we can move on one, exactly. The freedom of movement. Without the freedom of movement across borders, there's simply no aviation. There's no commercial aviation. And Schengen must therefore be re-established, not just for aviation, by the way, but for all modes of transport, of course. So we are ready to be able to deliver safe travel and reconnect European citizens as soon as possible. We want to really play a major role in the recovery of the European economy. The EU digital COVID certificate is a really helpful step for this summer, and we need governments now to make it work. But we can't make this we can't just make this new normal. We really need to get rid of all travel restrictions. Second important point we need to work on is rebuilding passenger confidence. EU 261, I would say by now the notorious regulation, has never been designed to deal with mass cancellations. Never mind a global pandemic. The Commission's 2013 proposal, what we've seen is a good basis for reform, which will benefit passengers and airlines through clear and balanced rules. The Council needs to get the job done now. It has really taken too long, and is really been on the Council's table too long for the past year. Air travel remains the safest mode of transport. We all know that. We have reinstated connectivity to respond to pent-up demand from our customers, and we have implemented stringent health safety protocols. Vaccination rates across Europe are increasing, with over 40% of adults already having one dose, and approaching 20% are now already fully vaccinated. The next point we need to work on is, of course, greening aviation. New technologies, improved operations, sustainable aviation fuels, and last but not least, smart economic measures such as EU ETS and CORSIA are all required measures to help us achieve net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. So let's make it work now. Let's start work now, or continue to work the hard work. But we cannot do this on our own. It takes two to tango. Governments must put in place supportive policies to attract the necessary investment to construct sustainable aviation fuel plans together with us, fuel plans that will deliver enough supply for the airline industry. And by the way, these will create highly valued green jobs and economic growth at global scale. So there's an opportunity for Europe to take the lead here. Governments must provide access to finance, loans, and grants to help scale up really SAF production. Such support would put higher SAF targets within reach and make them achievable earlier. The fourth point we need to work on is securing and harmonized efficient EU airspace. Again, I hear many of you say, well, it's been taking decades. What is going to change now? Well, the current crisis is really an opportunity for both industry and politicians to join forces and build aviation back better. It begins with an updated single European sky regulation. But national egoisms, sovereignty, and military concerns have gotten in the way again. That is a good show of last week's Council proposal, got in the way of not only the last years, but also last week, and have prevented a coordinated and harmonized and effective implementation of the single European sky. As a result of that, airspace efficiency and the resulting environmental benefits it would bring have been really put off and on hold for years, when it actually could be done today. This is low-hanging fruit from a technology perspective. We are lacking political will. And last but not least, we need to keep travel affordable. And this is what I'm also mentioned at the beginning of this slide, is let's take a close look at the the ideals and the objectives of single aviation market again. Yes, some of the market segments and realities may have changed, but this does not mean that the whole structure and the objectives and the ideas of single aviation market have gone or should be thrown away. That would be a big mistake. So Europe's rising vaccination rates now provide the foundation for a full-fledged reopening. We need the member states to put a coordinated framework in place so that we can deliver safe and smooth travel as customers would expect at the end of the day. Beyond dealing with the impact of potential travel restrictions, we unfortunately, again, will also face the unprecedented increase of ATC costs, what I mentioned earlier, which will be detrimental for a swift recovery. Another important structural reform is the Airport Charges Directive. This has, per the Commission's own analysis, not been effective in tackling the abuse of market power by the EU. Airports are ensuring that regulators have the power they need. There is a risk as the market recovers that large, not all, but large EU airports will use their market power to start charging excessive fees again. This impacts airline costs, it does, and overall cost of travel for European consumers. We're already seeing that some cases in some airports, that some airports want to increase charges on airlines to recover losses from the crisis. And A4E is simply asking for regulators to be given the tools they need to do their job, so they can intervene when and as necessary at the level of the airports, monopoly situations. This includes economic regulation when justified based on market power assessment. I think many of you know the background of this analysis. And it certainly will help to ensure that airports offer their services at a reasonable cost and quality. At this point, I would like to, stop here. I would like to thank you very much for your attention, for listening to me. Let me turn now to Richard Quest, the anchor, as you all know him as the anchor for CNN's Quest Means Business, who is joining us now from Croatia. Hi, Richard, and it's good to see you again, unfortunately only virtually, but it's good for you to, it has become a habit of you to join us every year, this year virtually, as we all do, unfortunately, and we are so grateful. I'm very grateful personally to welcome you again this year. Ladies and gentlemen, I pass the virtual floor to Richard now. Enjoy the summit.
Thomas, thank you very much. I look forward to this occasion in a sense because it is one of those few occasions of the year. IATA is the other one, but this focuses on Europe. This focuses the mind on the European aviation scene, and it is important. We have with us Slido. What an unfortunate name for any form of piece of technology. But anyway, we have Slido, which is bringing up a variety of poll questions along with those questions that you can ask, or you can, through me, ask our various speakers. I want to get straight to our first guest today. You've already heard from him in the press conference, maybe. Johan Lundgren is the Chief Executive of easyJet, and he's the chair of A4E for this year. And it's worth saying that later, Johan, you will be speaking to us probably more with easyJet than A4E, but for this part, I'm giving you your easyJet, your A4E hat. And when we look at the agenda, Johan, of what the organization is doing and how you are hoping to move forward, I wonder if anybody's listening, because A4E, IATA, Airlines for America, everybody has been asking again and again for greater rules, greater clarification, more openness on reopening, and you're not getting it. So is anybody listening to you?
Yes, they are. And thank you very much, Richard, as well. Listen, I think that the engagement we've had with the Commission around, for instance, the need to have a common approach on the certificate, the COVID, the digital, COVID certificate, that I think that the Commissioner Vălean and her colleagues really did a great job on. I think that is one of the things that we have been, debated, that there needs to be a common framework on how you can prove you've been vaccinated, how you can prove that you're recovering from the infections, and then also, the testing in there. So I think that is an example. The other one I would point to as well that this group of airlines have set some very, very firm and also ambitious commitments when it comes to the sustainability, the destination 2050 roadmap. There is no other group of airlines on any continent that had gone so far that we've been doing on sustainability as well. So I think that the purpose of the group was always to come together on the things that we can agree upon and speak with one voice on that. And I think we definitely have a number of examples that shows that.
Okay, but one other area just to get on the table, Belarus, and what happened, of course, to the Ryanair flight. It's gone quiet, the whole situation. I mean, we see these appalling videos of the poor people involved, these almost hostage videos. But are you satisfied with the response being limited to being told not to fly over their airspace? As a CEO and as an organization, do you think more should be done?
Well, first of all, I should just say that I feel awful for the people who were on board that plane. Everybody who was on board that plane, it must have been horrific. And then also, credit also to the crew, the Ryanair crew. I think they did a great job under very, very difficult circumstances. And this is an appalling act. I don't think we've seen the end on actually what the measures are now going to be in terms of how the response to this. But this is absolutely clear that we need to make sure that there is a firm response to make sure that this type of things is not being regarded as something that can be successful in any way. So I don't think we've seen the end of what those measures can be.
Right, but from an industry point of view, Willie Walsh at IATA, who we'll be talking to in just a moment, Willie Walsh says that two wrongs don't make a right, and that banning the airspace and banning landing rights merely provokes aviation further into risk and unsafe areas. Do you believe that too? Do you believe that these measures taken or that should be stronger?
Well, first of all, I think we need to find measures that actually works and prevents these types of things from happening. That's absolutely clear, and I would agree with Willie on that. But I do think it's also a fair assumption that when something like that happens, that you have to respond, and you have to respond robustly in that short space of time that has happened since then, to show that this is actually not acceptable, or nor can it be deemed to be safe that we allow overflying to take place when you see such a blatantly abuse of the rights that people have and airlines have to operate? But I do think that, like I said, we haven't seen the end of this or what the measures will be. But I think, once again, this is an appalling act, and we need to have measures in place to make sure that this doesn't get repeated or being incentivized by other type of states to engage in this type of behavior.
That is indeed the challenge. I look at Europe at the moment. I mean, if you look at the NOTAMs and the closed airspace, of course, you've still got parts of Ukraine, Crimea, and the region. You had Tel Aviv recently, which was closed off because of military activity there. And we've got now Belarus. Now, I know the airlines, you're used to it. It's meat and veg to airlines to have to make these safety assessments and risk assessments. But do you think the situation's getting worse?
Well, I think, as you said, this is not a new phenomenon. It has existed that we've not been able to fly over certain areas for reasons that you mentioned. And unfortunately, I think that will remain to be the case. And I think that is absolutely, something that we need to recognize and to live with, because that is unfortunately the state of the world that is today. Now, is this going to increase or will it decrease? Well, I'm a fundamentally optimist that people and countries alike, at its majority, absolutely want to protect the possibility for free mobility, and that can take place in a safe way. So, but we always kind of live with that there are regions around the world that unfortunately, would not be, appropriate to fly over at certain moments in time. But it's not new to that extent. Okay,
now look at the Slido question. I'm not planning to travel abroad because travel restrictions and the risk of quarantine are still high. 81% said I'm not yet. Say that. 19% I'm not yet fully vaccinated. I had to have 5 pieces of paper to get me to Croatia, and I'm fully vaccinated, Johan. And I still required entry forms, 2 PCRs, this, that, and the other. You're familiar with this because you've been doing some travel yourself. Unless we change that, surely we're looking at a miserable summer for aviation again.
But Richard, it is changing, and you credit also then to the number of states who actually has already endorsed to put a framework in play with transparency. And I'll highlight Holland as an example, who set out very clearly on what they believe, how you can fly and go between countries who were deemed to be low risk, and they measured it by infection of cases of 150 on 100,000 people, so anything that was below that. And that is a very, very good measure, because it gives the consumers and also the operators a way where they can actually track and see where the data is leading them into, so they can plan accordingly. And we also have, I think it is tomorrow that the ambassadors are now, being asked to endorse the council's proposition on a common framework on how to unwind these restrictions. And this is now taking place really across Europe. And the one that stands out is unfortunately UK, who and almost perversely, have, higher levels of vaccination rates, but, they have a traffic light system in place that is not backed up by data in terms of the decisions that they're making. But outside the UK and in Europe, this is now happening, and it's happening at speed. And I speak to ministers, as you would expect, across many of the European governments, and they really want to make sure that, there can be a safe restart of traveling taking place as soon as possible.
Finally, from an A4E point of view, and I know that you saw, the organization seeks common views where you can reach consensus. But what do you think the industry will come out of this at the end? So obviously some have had state aid to have helped stay in business. Others will have had loans. Some will have gone out of business. With the State of the Union, they always say the State of the Union is strong. Johan, since you've got the chair this year, what is the state of the industry?
I mean, it's not a question. I mean, the industry and the sector has been, probably the worst and the hardest, hit sector when you're looking in Europe. And actually, if you're looking at this on a global level, the European sector, aviation sector, has taken the hardest hit as well. So there's no doubt that if you're looking at this from the pessimistic side, every company has been taking on debt, as an example, various levels of debt, depending on what shape you were as you got into this. And there are a number of challenges that needs to be sorted out, unwinding restrictions in one place. But remember one thing, we know that there's a huge pent-up demand for people to travel. We know that in segments, particularly around being able now to reunite with families. Many families haven't seen each other, and there are millions of them across Europe here because of the restrictions. They want to go. People want to take that, well-earned, hard-earned holiday to go away for a break. We see in our core markets, that is the thing that comes up as number one thing that is on people's mind following the pandemic. Businesses, I don't believe for a moment the whole notion about that, that business travel will not recover. It might be take us, 1 or 2 year longer time than leisure travel. But, every occasion you have a Zoom call or you have a, event such as this, you will see some type of technical collapse in that. And that is taking place. And that is not good enough. You want to really be sure that you can expand and meet with suppliers and your customers. So on the positive side is that there's a huge pent-up demand for traveling. Now we just need to make sure that there's a common framework in place where these restrictions can be unwinded, and that we also then see that the digital certificate gets introduced.
Yeah, I'll thank you not to talk about technical disasters and problems at the beginning of a 2-hour seminar and group, but thank you. We'll see you later for the CEO debate when you can take your A4E hat on and put your easyJet hat on again. The issue, another question, which measures should be taken at the EU level to support European aviation's recovery from the crisis? This is not for you, but this is implementation of the single European skies, reform of airport duties, reform of air rights regulations. These are issues for guest. Our next guest is the EU Justice Commissioner, the sort of person who deals with all of these issues. By the way, 21% of you said implementation of the single European sky, SEC, is the most important issue for them. But what's the most important issue for Didier Reynders, the EU Justice Commissioner? That's next. The summer is upon us. The green list is going to be put out, and there will be the restoration of free movement in Europe. When and how?
We try to facilitate the free movement and to facilitate, of course, the waiving of all the restrictions to the free movement in Europe, at least from the 1st of July. Of course, we'll start maybe earlier in June, but for the 1st of July. Why? Because now we have a political agreement on a new tool, the so-called digital COVID certificate. So it will be possible in all the member states to issue the same document with a proof of your vaccination or the proof of a negative test or the proof of the recovery from the disease to be able to travel in all the European Union, because the certificate issued in one member state will be accepted. It's mandatory, it's a binding instrument by all the member states. So we facilitate with a tool first, a real proof of your situation in relation with the COVID-19. The second element that we have developed the digital tool to do that, because you will receive in Europe the certificate on a digital form, but also on a paper form. And so it's possible to use a QR code to protect the authentication of the certificate. And we have now developed the different instruments at the EU level in the member states to be able to start with such a new certificate in June and to be binding from the 1st of July. So when is there? And how we discuss also about a new recommendation to the member states about the way to lift the restrictions. To be concrete, is it possible for one people with a certificate to travel without any other restriction? Is it possible to travel also in such a way if you have a negative test? Of course, we need to have a sort of emergency brake if there is a new problem with a variant of concern or with another sanitary situation. But it will be so when the 1st of July, with a certificate and with a facilitation of free movement, and how, with such a tool and a possible lifting of many restrictions inside the EU.
And related to that, there'll have to be a testing regime as well. Firstly, for those countries that are not completely comfortable and want to keep some form of restriction or keep some form of testing. And secondly, for those who aren't vaccinated.
Yeah, for the vaccinated people, we are in discussion now, and we will try to have a final decision before the 15th of June in the Council about the way to don't have additional restrictions than the certificate, so vaccination or negative test. Again, except if we have a very negative situation in one of another area. Of course, the sanitary situation will be there. But if you are vaccinated, it must be possible to travel without any additional measure. And I will say that it will be the same for people coming from abroad. To give an example, from the US and from other third countries. Because if we open the border, it will be possible to prove the vaccination by different means in Europe, and then to receive, maybe as a US citizen, the digital...
Can you do it? Can you link the systems so that you don't have people turning up with scrappy little pieces of paper saying, this is my vaccination certificate. I have my digital certificate in my phone, but at the moment there isn't the facility. Now look, Commissioner, I know this is early days. I know we're at the forefront of technology. We're melding together vast systems in a hurry. Can you do it?
Yes, but we will work on both sides, with a digital form or with a paper form. But what we try to do also is to fight against all the frauds that we have seen on internet. It's possible to receive a false certificate. And so with the QR code that we will put on paper or on your smartphone or both, it will be possible to have a clear verification that we have an authentication of the certificate. And that's the gateway that we are organizing at the EU level. But if you come from abroad with a proof of vaccination, of course, it will be important to agree on the form. I've started to discuss, to give an example, with my US counterparts about that. Till now, we don't see a real intention to put into place a federal certificate. So we'll discuss about what should be or could be the best ways to prove the vaccination if you are coming from the US. And if it's possible to agree on a proof of vaccination, then you will receive a certificate at the EU level to travel not only in one member state, but in all the 27.
Can you get agreement? Barry, I was talking to the CEO of Lufthansa yesterday, who makes the significance of the importance of the transatlantic market. On that question, can you get an agreement so that vaccinated travellers from the US and vice versa can travel this summer? Or are we looking at the back end of the summer to get something in place?
Oh, you need to think about, like you said, the situation at the beginning of the summer. So not now, but in 1 month. And of course, we'll have a high rate of vaccinated people on both sides. If we look to the situation at the beginning of July, in Europe, it will be maybe 70% of the adults vaccinated. So it's very important to say that. With such a situation, we have two possible ways. The first one, it will be very efficient. With the opening of the border with the US, it will be possible to travel from the US to Europe with a proof of vaccination at the individual level. I say that because it's possible to come and then to receive maybe the European digital certificate. But of course, we're also in discussion to see if it's possible to have the same kind of mechanism in the US.
Right, my question is, I see where you're going. My question is, can there be realistic possibility of success? Can you get agreement with the US to put this in place for the summer 2021?
I'm quite sure, because I said we have the regulation, that it's clear, because we have a political agreement. It will be possible to vote the new regulation at the beginning of June in the Parliament and to agree in the Council. We have the technical solution, so the digital tool at the EU level and in the member states to do that. And we have started a discussion with our US colleagues. And again, you know that it will be possible to have a EU-US summit mid-June, between the 13th and the 16th. The President Biden will be in Brussels. And it will be possible, of course, to show that we are in a good position to solve all those issues. So it's very clear, we will be ready to do that, except, of course, all the time, if there is a negative evolution of the sanitary situation. But I'm quite sure that we will have a positive evolution due to the vaccination campaign.
You're a political animal, Commissioner. Is there a... No, it's not an insult. It was a compliment.
No, it's not an insult. You are a journalist, it's not an insult.
What I'm asking is, you're a political animal. Tell me, is the intention to announce something at this EU-US summit? Wouldn't that be a great thing if at that summit, Biden, von der Leyen, Michel are able to say, we have agreed the travel ban is lifted as from X, travel can begin from Y?
We will announce two elements, I'm sure. The first one is a very general one, is the intention to start again a common approach about the multilateralism. That's the main goal maybe of such a summit, to show that with the new administration, before it was more bilateral, and now we are very open to try to have in common an influence in many multilateral discussions. And of course, when we are looking to the free movement of people, we want to announce different kind of positive evolutions. The first one will be, I said, the final agreement in the Parliament in Europe about the certificate, the final testing of our system, and I hope so, the final decision about the opening of the border and the way to organize the recognition of the vaccination for people coming from both sides. From Europe, it will be with the certificate. It will be very easy. From the US, we are in discussion to see what are the ways to prove the vaccination. And if it's that, of course, it will be a real opening of the travels between the two sides of the Atlantic Ocean.
For completely understandable reasons, during the early part of the pandemic, the first 6-8 months, maybe the first year, all of 2020, there was a lack, this is my observation, there was a lack of coordinated activity when it came to travel and tourism. So some opened, some didn't. Some restrictions, the Schengen was suspended. All sorts of different things had to happen. But the common view, whether you accept this or not, is that there was a lack of coordination. Now you all have a chance to put that right for the reopening. How aware are you and your colleagues that you can't drop the ball on coordination for reopening?
We are quite sure that it will be better, of course, than at the beginning of the pandemic, due to two elements. we have started with some coordinations, really, in a recommendation, in the text, in October last year. And I must say it was quite difficult to ask to all the member states to apply and to implement correctly the recommendation. But we continue to discuss on all the different possible issues with the member states. But the second element, and that's the huge difference, when I'm speaking about a certificate, it's no more a recommendation, it's a regulation, binding for all the member states. So they agree now to use one tool and to exchange on such a basis in the entire Europe. And due to that, it will be easier to work with third parties, with not only the US, with UK, with Israel, with others. And so the main difference is that now we will have a binding instrument agreed by all the member states, but binding with only one certificate, only one use. And the second evolution, but that is, you're right, it's more coordination, is that I've seen that in many member states, there is a real intention to waive the restrictions, to go to less and less restrictions due to the vaccination campaign and due to the sanitary situation.
How significant has it been to keep the union together? For instance, Greece allows US, Croatia allows US. There's been a sort of splintering of the various countries when they've exercised their sovereign right, in a sense, to say, no, we will accept this. But now, with reopening, you really do have to bring everybody back under one umbrella, don't you?
Yes, but if it's under the same umbrella, to be able not only to travel in one member state, but in the entire Europe,
right,
it's more useful, of course, for US citizens coming to Europe, or you want to stay in the same village during some weeks, it's fine. But if you want to travel in the different countries, the different member states, it's better to have a coordination. And so we have organized that to avoid fragmentation, to don't ask to a US citizen to have 27 different certificates to go to one country to another one with different kind of methods. But the second element is that it's more easy now to organize a good coordination because we are going normally to a lifting of the restrictions, to a waiving of the restriction, and not to have additional restrictions. Of course, it was very difficult to organize a coordination where we were at the top of the pandemic, with many dead people and with a real emotion to take national decisions in all the member states. I fully understand that. It was a real competence of the member states. But now to see how it's possible to lift the restrictions, it's easier to work together. To give an example, if you are coming with a negative test, do you need to have such a test 48 hours before the travel or 72? It must be possible to agree on maybe 72, but on the same rule. And it's easy to do that in a movement to a better free movement, to a facilitation of free movement than in the beginning of the pandemic with so many dead people and so many difficulties.
What's your message to the airline CEOs at this conference? They are the ones who will be transporting tens of millions of people on their first vacations around Europe, their first vacations for a year. What's your message to those CEOs?
The message is that we are knowing the difficulties of the airline companies like also the airport. We know that the total sector and the tourist sector is a very difficult situation. But we are sure that for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, we'll provide sufficient tools and sufficient information about the coordination to have a better exercise by the citizens of their fundamental right, the free movement. But fundamental right, free movement, that means that it will be possible for the airline companies to come back with more and more passengers from the 1st of July. And it's one of the goals, not only for touristical activities, for different reasons if you need to travel, but I'm sure that we are now equipped with new tools to have a real first good season. Maybe not a perfect one, maybe not exactly the same than before the pandemic, but for the first time, we are going in the good direction. And I'm hoping that it will be the case for all the airlines companies concerned by such a conversation.
And where are you going on vacation this year, Commissioner?
For a part in the host country of the Commission in Belgium, but for a part also to the south, and maybe to the south of France. So I will be see if it's possible to travel also abroad, but more for professional reasons.
When you come to New York, please come and say hello.
It will be a pleasure.
EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders talking to me just last week when I was obviously in New York, and events perhaps have moved on since we spoke, particularly as we now deal with not just the question of reopening, but also the question of safety in the skies. Got issues that I'm looking forward to discussing with someone who used to be, so he was always at this event because he was a CEO, and he was one of the founder CEOs. Now he's back at this event because he's the head of IATA, the representative body. It's Willie Walsh, who's the Director General of IATA, who joins me next. Can't keep you away, Willie.
No, I'm actually delighted to be back. To be honest, you know, it would be great to be meeting everybody in person, but I suppose we'll just have to put up with this technology for a little while longer.
Is it different? I mean, you're wearing a different hat now. So before we start questioning you, let's know from whence you speak. What will be the difference in your remit between running an airline and now being the airline spokesbody?
Well, to be honest, I don't think it's that different. As you know, I was always happy to talk on behalf of the industry and to give views that I felt the industry shared. So, you know, my position now is that I get paid to do that. So, you know, I'm enjoying what I'm doing. Clearly, you know, the opportunity to run IATA was one that I thought would be interesting, and I felt that I could make a difference, and hence the reason I'm here. And you know, it's a great industry, but we're really suffering at the moment, and we do need people to listen to what it is we're saying about potential solutions.
I want to start with Belarus. I was surprised when I saw your statement last week after the Commission banned the airspace and the Batavia from flying across and vice versa, that your point was two wrongs don't make a right. I get that. But I also see that there had to be some form of action taken by the union beyond sanctions. And I was surprised that you felt that they'd taken the wrong action.
Yeah, and it's a great question. I'm glad you asked, because I don't disagree with you that more action was required. But you don't use safety to impose a political decision. That's disgraceful. You cannot politicize safety. EASA should stand above politics. And when it makes decisions or takes decisions, it should be based on a safety assessment that we all understand. And my fear is if you politicize that process, then you actually risk undermining the very fabric of the safety structure that makes our industry the most safe form of transport. So I've no objection if politicians want to respond to the issue politically and take measures such as sanctions, but they should not be using safety. Politicizing safety is absolutely wrong.
Why is it politicizing safety to close the airspace? Surely, if the airspace is closed, where is the safe aspect?
No, but the question is you're closing the airspace because you're deeming it to be unsafe without evidence to support it being unsafe. You know, what I said should have happened, and I believe I would be supported by the vast majority of airlines, is airlines do safety assessments. They assess the risk and they decide whether it is safe to continue. For the regulator to take that responsibility away from the airline and say, we're telling you it's unsafe. By default, actually, what they're saying is everything we don't tell you is unsafe is automatically safe. So where does the responsibility rest? In my opinion, what should have happened is if politicians wanted to respond to what happened in Belarus, they should have taken a political decision and used other avenues available to them rather than, you know, wrapping it up and saying it's an unsafe decision and therefore we're going to pursue a political sanction using safety as the method that we do it.
But do you not think it would be egregious, bordering on obscene for airlines to be landing in Minsk, knowing what had happened? But
let the airline decide, Richard. You know, let the airline decide. And if an airline decides that they're going to continue to fly through the airspace, or to continue to serve Belarus, let them justify why they're doing it. You know, rather than being told that we have deemed, politically, we have deemed it to be unsafe. Let the airlines justify their decisions exactly as we do today. You will have situations where some airlines will continue to fly and others won't, because there will be a different assessment of the risk that they face.
You were in the trenches at IAG and delayed your retirement from IAG until, as a result of the COVID crisis. Now you see us reopening. From a European perspective, you've been critical at the lack of coordination. Are you happier now?
No, I'm happy that some states, and I think they deserve credit, are beginning to reflect on the decisions that they've taken and are now reassessing the risk and are reducing or removing restrictions. Exactly as you had said, I didn't catch all of the previous speaker. It would be so much better if Europe could have a common standard. You know, the PCR testing that he commented on, some require 24, some 48, some 72 hours. Yeah, that should be relatively simple for Europe to come together on. And it is creating a lot of confusion in the minds of travelers. So I would have expected Europe to do better and coordinate more closely on issues like that. Individual states may assess the risk to their state to be at a different level. It could possibly because of the health environment, the health infrastructure in their country. I fully accept that. But what we've seen is, so many different decisions, no clear evidence of it being based on health risk, much more clear evidence that it's political risk that's driving the agenda at the moment. When it's very clear to all of us that the risk environment we're operating in today is significantly different to the one we faced 500 days ago.
The goal of A4E is consensus to some extent, but you don't have to live by those rules anymore. So on the state aid question, that I can see, obviously Michael disagrees with Carsten, disagrees with Ben and all that. From a global perspective, where you've got Gulf carriers, to quote Michael, trousering the money and heading off, and you have support being given to so many carriers. Do you think it's right that European governments did help the airlines?
I think it's right that there's a common framework that's properly applied in Europe. That's the beauty of the EU. So going back to what I said earlier, it would be great to see that common framework applied to this pandemic. But where state aid is involved, there is a framework in place, and so long as everybody complies with the rules, and it's clear from some legal decisions that have been taken place that have been disclosed recently, the courts are saying that they haven't fully complied with the rules. Well, then we have to accept that that's the system that's in place, and that's the system that should be applied.
Willie, finally, briefly, some airlines are already buying Boom's supersonic jet. If you were the CEO of an airline, would you be looking to buy it?
No, I wouldn't. I have the nice position of having seen what the profitability of Concorde was before I joined British Airways. As you know, it was grounded almost exactly a year before I joined. Quite honestly, it would have been the first decision I had taken if it was still flying, would have been to ground Concorde. It wasn't a profitable operation. It was technically extremely complex, and the decision to take it out of service, although we all love to see that aircraft fly, was the right decision. And I'm not convinced that supersonic transport is the right move going forward. I think we've got plenty of other opportunities and challenges that we should be addressing. But we'll watch with interest. But no, I wouldn't be buying one.
Now we know. Thank you. Good to see you, Willie Walsh. Many thanks, head of IATA, who is now, of course, the global spokesperson, the industry's main person that we all look to when we on these policy and major decisions. And so Willie wouldn't buy the new Boom supersonic plane. And Airbus, I'm guessing, isn't about to make one either. But that hasn't stopped Guillaume Faury, the director, CEO of Airbus, from joining me to discuss exactly what's happening. Now, bear in mind the number of airlines that have cancelled, delayed, restricted new purchases. It's left Airbus with what I thought was a lot of planes. Let us start with the state of the industry, if you like, the state as seen by Airbus, because from what I can see, it suggests things are getting better, faster than we might have thought.
There is actually a lot of diversity in the situations we are observing. Indeed, on the single aisle business, we are in discussion with customers, and they see the recovery coming, or they're already in the beginning of the recovery. And after a year and a half of very tough situation, a much lower level of deliveries, we see that the slots, the deliveries which have been deferred, are now coming at a point where we will need to increase our production to serve that demand. That's a very different situation on the wide bodies. And as we have confirmed recently, we think we are in this scenario of lower for longer. It's a long and difficult situation for the long haul business.
Obviously, the narrow body, I see you've been warning your suppliers to prepare for some sort of ramp up, and you're talking about heading back to the 40s per single aisle planes per month. When do you think you'll get to that sort of level?
We were at around 60 a month beginning of 2020, just before being hit by the pandemic. Then we adjusted to 40 a month. It's a very significant reduction, and compared to what we had planned, it's roughly minus 40%. We're still at that rate as we speak, but we will start to ramp up slightly by end of this year. We should be at around 45 by end of 2021. And then we will continue to ramp up, because that demand that has not been served needs now to be served, and we need to be ready to deliver around 60 again, sort of 3 years after the start of the pandemic. So for the single aisle, it's a sort of 3 years drop.
Right, and I'm wondering, do you think the recovery in the single aisle, they're cheaper planes, but also they serve markets that are reopening faster, domestic markets in the United States, intra-EU markets within Europe, ASEAN markets, where there's likely to be a lot faster rather than the transcontinental stuff that requires wide bodies?
Yes, Richard, that's exactly the point. The reopening is starting by country, by regions, for a number of reasons, but mainly because of the way the pandemic is being managed, and also because there are very different ways of dealing with the situation by blocks, US, China, Europe, and the reopening of the traffic between those blocks will take more time.
If this is the case, how do you see your ability to manage Airbus through this transition? Because you sort of scaled back, and now you have to slowly ramp up, but at the same time keep the supplier base going in very difficult circumstances. How difficult is that to manage?
It's been a roller coaster for the industry, for the OEMs, but as well for the suppliers. We were all together in a very steep ramp up in 18, 19, beginning of 2020. Then we had to do a very fast and challenging ramp down, being at a much lower rate now than we were before, and all the adaptation that comes with it. And now we have to ramp up again. And we think it's a lot about anticipation, about planning, about scheduling, onboarding, recruiting people, training, and be ready on time. That's the reason why we have tried to be as transparent as we can moving forward, giving indication of what we think will happen.
I know that you've worked with airlines rescheduling delivery dates, particularly on the wide-bodied equipment. But how many airlines have either gone bust and left you with planes, or have simply said, Guillaume, I'm not taking them, do what you like?
We've had many different situations, depending on the airlines and also over time. It's fair to say that the airlines have been and are in a very difficult environment. It's sometimes life-threatening for the airlines. But I would say, generally speaking, we're able to find solutions, to sit down, to look at the situation as it is and work hard to find outcomes that are manageable, more or less manageable for all parties. But it's been a very difficult period of time. It will continue to be, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of negotiation, a lot of creativity as well to find a solution that can work.
It reminds me of the old joke about, I owe the bank 500, that's my problem. I owe the bank 50 million, that's the bank's problem. I mean, an airline that's got a large order book with you, there is a vested interest on both sides to sort that out, isn't there? Nobody wants to push the other to the brink.
That's right. But what we have observed as well is the trust of the majority, if not all airlines, that there will be a recovery, that they will need modern planes moving forward, that it will be a tough competition in the market, and to be equipped to compete, they need planes. And therefore, as I have said already a couple of times before, we thought entering into the pandemic, there would be more cancellations than what we have actually observed.
In this case, we also take the opportunity to look at the environment. I know you have very ambitious plans where the environment's concerned. How far have those plans had to be adjourned? Not cancelled, but just put off, delayed, moved to the future whilst you're dealing with the crisis. Net zero, everybody's working towards it, and aviation continues to be one of the most criticised sectors.
Yeah. I believe, and the team around me believes, that this mega trend of environment, global warming, and the pressure that comes on many industries, including aviation, is very strong, will not slow down, and we have not reduced our ambitions and our speed when it comes to environment, to net zero, to the decarbonisation of aviation. So we have trimmed a lot of projects. We have reduced our capex, our expenses, but on the R&T side, on the technologies, we have maintained the pace.
Since we're talking to A4E, who are sort of well versed in all of these things, aviation is continuing. And in fact, I would say aviation, the criticism of aviation is growing despite all the technological advances and the improvements. But the perception as a polluter continues even greater. And I'm wondering what more the industry can do to get its message across, if indeed it can, or is it just going to be tarred?
We need to probably communicate differently to at least have the public having the right figures in mind, the right share of aviation contributing to the global warming, because we seem to be a bit here and there the scapegoat of the global warming. Yeah. There are maybe other forces at play. I mean, fighting against aviation is also a way to fight against globalization, and sometimes carbon is used as an argument to fight against aviation for other reasons. But I think we have a duty as an industry. We've been growing, we've been very successful. Now we have this headwind. We have a duty as an industry to do more, but as well to communicate better on what we really are, how we contribute to the prosperity that will be required to fight against global warming.
I venture, I'll be controversial, I'll be provocative. It's a battle you're losing at the moment in the public domain. I mean, all the surveys show that travellers love to go on holiday and hate the fact that planes pollute.
Obviously, we all hate the fact that there is pollution. By the way, carbon is not pollution. It's global warming, but the CO2 is not a polluter. Okay, but that's not a minor comment. But this being said, of course, and as an individual as well, I really want to be able to do what I do, and not only flying, all the human activities, reducing the carbon footprint, so that's okay. But you're saying we are losing the battle. Well, there is more winds, obviously, there is more headwinds, and we need to do more. But I strongly believe aviation is part of the solution. It's part of the problem, but it's a bigger share of the solution because we will need that prosperity to be able to do the energy transition. It's going to be very expensive, it's going to be long, and therefore we will need to be able to afford to do that.
I've seen your plans for strange-shaped aircraft with people sitting in the wing, and I've seen your plans for hydrogen fuel, and we're a long way off from the fully electric powered aircraft. What's realistic in our lifetime, Guillaume?
There are short-term solutions, mid-term solutions, and more longer-term ones. On the short term, there are quick wins. Air traffic management, and we just saw the announcement in Europe today of the commitment to simplify the sky and to be able to save the unnecessary time in the air that leads to delays, that leads to longer flights, to non-economical flights, and also to unnecessary carbon emissions. On the short term as well, and that's probably the most important one and where we have the highest level of opportunity, it's on the SAFs, on the sustainable aviation fuels, because the planes we deliver are already capable of 50% of SAFs, and it's a bit like a car that would be a plug-in hybrid, where you would never use the electricity in the battery and you would always drive your car on kerosene. That's really a missed opportunity. So we really have an avenue here. We need to see this SAF industry growing, so we could, on the short term, reduce the carbon emissions. And then there is more the long term and the mid-term and long term with hydrogen and with e-fuels, synthetic fuels, where there is huge potential to convert the aviation into carbon neutral. And we are seriously working on this. We have said at Airbus that by 2035, we see the entry into service of the first hydrogen plane. And for the moment, we stick to that plan. And there's a lot of work that is converging to make that possible. 2035. All right, I'll be early 70s by then. But you say that we'll both be on a plane powered by hydrogen by 2035. No deviation. You don't want to give yourself a qualification. You don't want to give yourself a get-out-of-jail-free card. There are challenges. There are challenges on the plane itself. We need to work on technologies which are not very mature today. They are applied in other businesses, but they need to be matured for aviation. But it's really not unlikely that we will be ready for the technologies by 2025 and therefore be ready to launch a plane. There are other challenges, getting the certainty that there will be by 2035 enough fuels, decarbonized fuels, to justify those investments on the plane. We need also alignment on the regulation, but honestly, at the speed at which things are changing at the moment, I am more and more optimistic every day. Finally, you've got your 220, you've got your 320 family, you've got the 330 Neos, and you've got the 350. So you have a broad range now. You pretty much do it all. Where is your focus for future aircraft development? You're right in saying that we have a very good portfolio of platforms. We believe the evolution will be on those platforms, on systems, on connectivity, on energy management, decarbonization of the planes. And we think those platforms have the potential to embed those changes on the different systems, including the propulsion systems. So we are more looking on how we're going to evolve those platforms over time, like we do with the XLR, like we could do for other of those products with new variants, and very much looking forward to introducing the decarbonization bricks at a later stage. One final question, which I am asking all CEOs. The crisis, what have you learned about yourself and the way you manage your company? Because I was talking to Carsten Spohr recently, and I was talking to Ed Bastian, and they were both telling me that there were days when they woke up to see the money flowing out
And they said that there was an existential moment in their cases for the company, and they had to work and they had to draw upon their own resources. So what have you learned about yourself? Never mind your team, yourself.
I would say as part of the team, we have learned that we can do more than what we think. And probably in crisis, under pressure, when the situation is really complex, we can do more than what we think.
Trying to get people to tell me what they have learned about themselves, and everybody skates to the thicker ice of talking about the team, which is important. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting for a moment that any single person does it, but I keep trying to get to the management CEO style. We've got a CEO debate coming up in a moment. I'm going to have another bash. There's also the Slido.
Great question. It's a great question.
Oh, thank you, sir. We'll come to you in a second. There's also the Slido where you can ask your questions direct through me. I promise you, nasty questions can still be asked. The nastier, the better, to be frank. And then I can just hide behind it saying, oh, I didn't say that. They said it. You get the idea. Right. We need to move on. And we need to talk about the actual aircrafts themselves, the manufacturers of aircraft. Our next two guests are from Boeing. It's Chris Raymond, the Chief Sustainability Officer, the first Chief Sustainability Officer of Global Enterprise Sustainability. A lot of sustainability in that title. And Mohamed Ali, the Vice President and General Manager of Engineering at GE Aviation. These gentlemen join me now. Right, let's start. Good to see you. First, Chris, I don't think you're going to escape. I'm going to ask you about what you learned about yourself at the end, so don't think you're escaping that. Same for you, Mohamed Ali. Right, let's start though. We always think about the sustainability. The reality is sustainability is boring, but it's essential, and it is now part of a legal framework that has to be adopted. So, Chris, the biggest, most important aspect of sustainability in your view?
For me, what motivates me about the job, I've been with Boeing 35 years, Richard, and it's nice to be with you today. I am motivated because I think this is an area where, for us, this is how we become a trusted partner, we become a transparent partner, and we help the industry grow aerospace sustainably. Our purpose at the company is to protect, connect, and explore the world and beyond. And I think we have to do that safely and sustainably, and that's going to mean all aspects of ESG. But to your earlier point with Mr. Faury, I think the industry and the customers that are on this line and what they represent for this industry, they moved 4.5 billion people in 2019. They moved 7 trillion in goods. And as the opening video showed, some of that was vaccines or all the products we've had delivered to our homes. And there's about 88 million jobs supported by this industry, many of which are science, technology, engineering, and math, which almost every country on the world wants more of. And so I think we do have to acknowledge this industry has a lot of societal benefits. We want it to grow, but it needs to do so sustainably.
All right, so the engines, Charlie, they are the heart of it. In a sense, aren't they? They are the bit. Most of the gains, with the exception of the lighter composites, most of the gains come from the engines. How close are we to near perfection on that?
Let me jump in, Richard. And by the way, it's my honor to be here. It's my first time to be with you, and I just want to say I'm a huge fan.
Oh.
And you sold me before on being in the aviation industry while I was watching you. So it's a great honor for me to be in here. You said sustainability is boring. I respectfully would disagree with that. Take my job. Sustainability for me is huge excitement. It's a noble cause. And you want to now talk about all the technologies that need to be developed and all the excitement of change that we are going to have to make to, quite honestly, for a noble cause of creating a better future for my children and our grandchildren and for the planet.
No, but you are at the heart of it in a sense, because the power plant is where the majority of gains are made. So let's say, for example, biofuels, and we know they work. Mohamed, we know they work, but we also know that we can't create them and develop them and grow them or manufacture them in sufficient quantities for the size of the industry. So what purpose?
So that's, I think, when there is a leaf to be borrowed from the renewable energy industry as well, in which you want to create a stable regulatory framework that provides the right incentives. And let's talk about that. As we all know, economies and people, they respond to incentives. And I think if you create the right incentives and the right demand for that in a stable, long-term environment, that will enable the deficiency that we have now in SAF to be caught up. And there will be the producers who would be able to do that.
As the chief, Chris, and by the way, gentlemen, either of you, if the other has said something you want to just jump in, feel free to just jump in at any stage. Chris, this idea though of the new aircraft, essentially the aircraft, the 787s, the 350s, the whatever, they're using new composites, and we've got more efficient existing engines. But what's the leap that has to be made that will take us into a new era?
The way, Richard, we think about sustainable aerospace, and I think this is particularly apropos as we recover the industry right now. I think the first step is the fleet renewals that are occurring. And the good news of our industry is the basic level of competition in our industry is efficiency, which is fuel efficiency in many ways. And so the flights today are 50 to 60% less carbon emitting than they would have been a couple of decades ago. So every generation gets better by 15 to 25%, thanks to people like Mohamed and Boeing and Airbus. And so first step, fleet renewal. And if you look at what our customers are doing, many of them are doing that. They're leaving the older airplanes retired. The second step is continuously looking for operational efficiencies. And our airline customers do that. We all do that, looking for things like carbon composites and greater use of those in structures or enhancements for aerodynamic efficiency. The third step, and I think this gets to where you're going with your question, is really this transition to new energies. Some of those we believe will need to be SAF in various pathways, including power to liquid. And then that's where electric and hydrogen are starting to get applied to our industry in the early stages. And then we'll get to the advanced technologies that in some market segments can apply those, to a flying machine.
Is it going to be too little too late though, Mohamed? At the end of the day, the hydrogen, the liquid to fuels, these ideas, we need something quicker.
Yeah, and let me talk about that for a second. And I agree with everything that Chris said. I think SAF is going to be the art of the possible now. Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the possible. We are a company that believes in continuous improvement. So we need to continue doing that. In addition to that, you're going to need these technological breakthroughs, and we believe in that. There's actually a reason I'm talking to you right now from a hotel in France, is because next Monday we're going to be making a major announcement about a significant improvement and leap forward in technologies. And it's a whole suite of technologies that we're going to show our commitment. That's going to have SAF, it's going to have fuel flexibility, it's going to be hydrogen capable as well. So I'd like you to stay tuned for next Monday, because these leaps are going to be needed for the future as well.
You're just teasing us.
I am.
No, shameful. All right, Chris, SAF. SAF means all things to all people.
I think there's going to be, Richard, our view is there's going to be a lot of pathways. There's already 5 or 6 pathways, meaning a feedstock and a process technology that can produce a qualified aviation fuel. As Mr. Faury said today, those are at about 50% blends. And so I think we need to be incentivizing all these paths. I think this is where don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. I think the feedstocks and the processes will change over time.
But what distresses me particularly, having covered the industry for a good few years, is the perception of the industry as a polluter, as a major global polluter, is not borne out obviously by the statistics at one level, but the industry's done a really poor job of getting that message across.
Yeah, that's a fair enough point. I think we all have to remember that when we're in these forums, we have to communicate the societal benefits of this industry, as I tried to do up front. And then I think we also have to be doing a better job communicating why aviation needs these incentives around sustainable aviation fuel. And we can't let aviation get overly mixed up in ground transport or green diesel. Aviation is a hard to abate sector with huge benefits to the world. We need to make sure some of these policies are focused on the unique aviation frameworks needed.
How difficult is it for either of you, how difficult is it to maintain the level of investment required for increased sustainable development of aircraft and power plant at a time when basically, if you look at the money everybody's been losing, one's tempted just to say, okay, we know we'll do it, but we'll do it just not now.
I think, Richard, we are embracing that. Let me speak for myself here and for our company and our partners. We are embracing that challenge. I mean, if we look at 2020, we sustained our level of investment. It's actually, this is the right moment for us to rebuild better with a sustainable focus. And we want to create technologies that will serve us now, because we have a large fleet that's flying, and we have been continuously improving our fleet. I'll tell you a personal story. CF6, powering 767s and powering A330s, and many other airframes. We have invested in a performance improvement package for our customers, and we continuously will do that. We provide our customers with foam wash, 360 wash, that will continuously improve their performance. So these services technologies will continue to invest in them. And at the same time, when we create, we are also want to invent the future of flight. It's in our DNA to do both, serve our customers now and continuously work toward that perfection for the future.
And I would just add, Richard, that we feel the same. We've had to, despite the pandemic and the challenges it's put on all of us financially, we've maintained our commitment to our research and technology. We've put a greater emphasis on sustainability in that time, myself and my job included. And we also have a dedicated chief engineer around this now. So I think it's only more important. And we've always been a long cycle industry in aviation in terms of how technologies mature, get certified, and enter the market. And I don't think any of us can shrink from that at this moment, especially given how important the next decade is.
How easy is it, Chris, to get lost in the jargon and the ESGs and the MSGs and the this and the that, and the pressures that are the external pressures that come towards you, when the reality is you've got to keep your eye on where we're going?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you have to really sift through all that and focus on what's going to make a difference to the industry and to your primary stakeholders, of which our customers and our employees are at the top of the list. And so we've had to do that like every company, Richard. You have to, I think, sort through all that and decide where you're really going to put your time, your energy, your investment. And in this business, it's on things that contribute to fuel efficiency and SAF.
Richard, let me help here. We embrace that pressure. We actually want to pioneer.
What do you mean by SAF? What do you mean by SAF?
I mean the ultimately what is a lower carbon emitting fuel, up to 80% or so better on the carbon emissions, with the potential to get to 100.
And how close are we to achieving that on scale?
Oh, we're a long way from scale, Richard. There's approved processes, feedstocks, and fuels, but we haven't been able to draw the capital to that industry yet to scale those known processes and to continue to explore future ones like PTL. And that's what I think we as an industry are focused on. I can tell you here in the US, the Sustainable Skies Act that was just introduced has widespread support of the aviation industry.
Mohamed, is it going to take
we have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think there are multiple stakeholders here that all can come together and make it happen.
They can. Is it going to take a carrot or a stick to make this happen? Because at the moment, it would appear, if we look, for example, at emissions, if we look at the 2050 proposals, there's a sort of a halfway house between carrot and stick approach being used. If you'll do it, you'll get certain benefits. If you don't, we'll rule, the regulator will move in anyway. So which works best?
Let me borrow this old saying about economies. Economies respond to incentives. They always do.
Yeah, we've been there too, Richard. I think the incentives, in our view, are the best. If we're going to use mandates, they should be coupled with incentives, because ultimately you've got to free up the capital to flow into this. And if we look at some of the other energies that have transitioned, I think we would find that the incentives have been critically important. I think if we look at the state of California as an example here in the US, it was important, and in biofuels and biodiesel. So I think if they're both important, but we would bias heavily towards the incentives as a way to scale up and draw capital.
Chris, I know both of you gentlemen, your companies have many plans and designs and thoughts. But Chris, if you had to choose one, and the question would be the same question for you, Mohamed. If you had to choose one that you have great hope for and you want us to know about, which would it be?
One technology?
One thing that Boeing is working on.
Well, at the top level, I'd say sustainable aerospace. I think all of our investment is going into that in one way or another. But I think for our industry, it's going to be the scale up of SAF in the next decade. That is critically important to this industry.
And what's it going to take, do you believe, to get that that scale, that sustainability, that growth to get to sustainable SAF?
People like Mohamed and I have to do the work to make sure our products are capable of 100% operation on it, to know what has to change. That's our side of that equation. And then we have to step out and I think help advocate for the incentives that will scale up the supply at a reasonable economics.
Mohamed, the time scale, no, hang on a second. The time scale that you need to do this is what?
So there are multiple time scales here, as I talked about. That is what we can do now. And what we can do now is to accelerate SAF, like Chris just said, and invent all of these technologies that will also enable us in the future. And I think that let's not make the perfect the enemy of the possible. We just have to continuously improve until we get that level of zero emission and perfection that you spoke about, Richard. And that's our noble cause that we all have to wake up every day thinking about. And I think there's going to be a place in the future for SAF. I think there's going to be a place for hydrogen. And I think there's going to be a place for hybrid electric. And all of that is going to happen, and it's going to enable that sustainable future that we all are looking forward to.
I was listening. I don't know if you heard me speak to at Airbus, and they're talking about 2035. I was working out how old I'll be by that age, by that date to do that. What's the date on your calendar, Chris?
Would be.
Sorry, Mohamed. We'll go. No, go.
Okay,
first.
Let me start then.
Please.
We actually love what Guillaume said, and we'll be ready with the technology that will enable our customers and have our power, our thrust under the wing.
So you'll be ready by 2035 at least. All right, Chris, what will you be ready with?
I think we are thinking it's closer to the middle of the century for things like that. And it's hard to predict the date until you really understand whether the technology can scale. But we've flown 5 different instances of hydrogen-powered airplanes, either fuel cells or liquid hydrogen with propulsion, with combustion engines. So we've learned a lot about what that's going to take. We've been talking to people that are in the industrial use of hydrogen about what it takes to transport it and store it. And so we think it's closer to the middle of the century, and it'll probably enter the market in some of the lower segments, shorter haul segments, as electric will. And I think electric will come into the market sooner and initially be more of a change to road transport. And then it has the potential to scale if the battery technology can be resolved. And until then, I think the industry will continue to work on efficiency of engines and airframes and scale up sustainable aviation fuel.
You see, that's fascinating, Chris, because that's an extremely honest view, as indeed as Mohamed put it as well, on what is realistically possible. And the CEOs that I'll be talking to yet in a moment will wax lyrical about what they're doing and the incentives and things that they want. But the reality is what you've just said, isn't it, Chris?
Well, I don't know if it's the reality. All we're saying is it's hard to predict those kind of things until you first get through the technology understanding and you know it can scale. And then I think we would all agree that's not the only thing you have to solve. You have to safely introduce these things into the airspace and to certify them, and you have to make the changes to the infrastructure. We enjoy the societal benefits of a globally connected business, and the infrastructure that has to change to be able to operate these new technologies globally is not trivial, even once you've solved the technology issues associated with how you put it on a flying machine or make a fuel out of it.
And Richard, this is really an important point. I think there's got to be a place for SAF. There's going to be a place for hydrogen. There's going to be a place for hybrid electric. And it's upon us to enable SAF and accelerate it and invent these technologies, other technologies also for the future. And the public is expecting us to do that safely foremost.
Do you
and affordably, and at the same time protect the future of our planet. And as an engineer, I'll tell you, I embrace that challenge. I studied and I worked hard to embrace that challenge.
I'm not asking you to bash the environmentalists. I'm really not. But I am asking you, do you think the public has a realistic view when it looks at aviation? They want to travel. They want to go and see visiting friends and relatives. They want to go and have their summer holidays, but they don't want to face the reality of what Chris was saying about the timescale for environmental change in aviation. Start with you, Mohamed, then to you, Chris.
I'll go and I'll say I welcome the dialogue with the public and all the NGOs. I really do, and I really mean it. And we respectfully want to have that dialogue with them and talk about, because we really believe it can be, we call it the trilemma, but it can be achieved all together safely, affordably, and sustainably. And there are technologies that will enable that for the future.
Chris, you got the last word.
I'd say just briefly that we need to all communicate on that, to your earlier point, Richard. And I think the customers, thanks to our airlines, many of the customers today are starting to have those options with responsible offsets if they choose to do that on their flights right now. And I think that we need to make sure that's the consumers are aware of that. And so if they wanted to do something about it right now, they can. And then we need to communicate what the industry's doing about it over the longer term as well.
I'll be looking forward to flying on your planes, powered by your engines, gentlemen. I thank you. Whilst I've been talking, the little screens in front of me have lit up with the CEOs of all the major European carriers. The CEO debate comes up next after we remind ourselves why this summer is so important.
It is important for our mental health and well-being that travel and tourism in Europe reopens this summer.
For the international student who wants to surprise her parents with a long overdue visit.
And the airport shop employee who wants to make sure you don't show up empty-handed.
For the workers from home who are all zoomed out and can't wait to pack their suitcases again.
And the staff who want to make sure your luggage arrives on time.
For the parents with kids who want to escape their city apartment.
And the flight crew who want to get you to your destination in comfort and safety.
We are all asking European governments to work together
towards a clear and simple approach
to reopen travel safely this summer.
It's time
to reconnect
Europe.
And the CEOs are all there. You can see one after. There's Johan, there's Luis, there's Michael, there's Ben, and then Carsten is also with us, of course. Michael, you have to leave us early at past. So I'm going to jump straight in with you. And let me just set a parameter for the debate or discussion we're going to have. It's not going to be completely dominated by the reopening or by the COVID issues, because I think there's other issues now. We've all heard your views on that earlier in the press conference. So I will be going to other areas. Michael, I do want to hear, though, from you on Belarus. We haven't heard from that. Your crew did a fantastic, magnificent job. Are you happy with the measures that the European governments have taken, or would you now like to see more, bearing in mind it was your aircraft involved? You're muted, Michael.
Sorry, I think we're just got to be careful in the commentary on the Belarus incident. It is still under investigation. We're still waiting. We have compiled our final report and submitted to ICAO. ICAO are investigating it and will publish a final report. I think the European governments and authorities have taken appropriate action. Certainly, most of the airlines are flying around Belarus at the moment. We would not like that to be a long-term outcome. I have a considerable sympathy with Willie's position, and that is, politicizing air travel is not the way forward. But there are some, I think this was a in my view personally, this is a state-sponsored hijack. And that's not acceptable. And the Belarusians must provide appropriate, I think, guarantees that all of us airlines, including the Belarusian airlines, will be allowed to overfly that state and the EU without similar interruption in future. And I don't want to go any further really in the commentary on that.
I understand, Carsten. You flew to one of your group flew to. Are you there, Carsten?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, your camera's just been switched off, don't worry. There you are, back again. Hearing what Michael said, knowing what Willie's position and IATA's position is, where are you positioning Lufthansa Group?
Well, we indeed are backing up the idea that this is such an unheard of hijacking that indeed there needs to be an extreme set of sanctions put against it. But we do agree with the position of IATA that safety can never be traded against anything, one way or another way. So I think to overfly Belarus should be decided by the individual airline. The fact that maybe the country is locked off, so you're not allowed to fly to Belarus, I think that is a more political decision. But the overflight, we all believe, is a purely operational issue. Then you need to understand that there's quite a few other airspaces around that area which are closed. So for us, it's getting more and more difficult to find a route into China and to other parts of that in the world. So again, overflight should be left to the airlines, like IATA is suggesting. Locking off the country, as the EU has decided, probably is the right measurement for such an unheard of incident, as Michael was rightly describing it, as state-governed or state-supported hijacking.
The EU 261. EU 261, it is the EU law rule that you all loathe, but it won't disappear. It won't change, it won't disappear. Johan and then Louise, do you have any hope that you will get any relief on EU 261? And by the way, as we're talking, if any of you want to just jump in after, feel free to come straight in when one's finished. Don't wait to be invited.
Yes, I do think we should be hopeful that there will be a revision of it, because when you speak to the decision makers and people on this subject, they agree it is not fit for purpose. And there are examples where it's just badly written, and now it's being left to individual courts to make a call on some of these things that actually this was never meant to be in the first case. So, it's not like, people are sitting and disagreeing that this needs to be reformed. So I think it will happen, but it's long overdue now.
Luis.
Yes, no, I think that even before the COVID, we were considering that the 261 needed a review, but now it's clear that we need to change it, because it was never designed to deal with mass cancellations. So we cannot afford a situation like we have right now. But despite all these challenges, last year, Airlines for Europe, we refunded the customer over 10 billion euros. So I think we need to review the 261 and to do it in a more balanced way.
constantly worry that the industry, or think that the industry collectively has a voice. Ben Smith, the industry has a voice. A4E says, people talk, but you always seem to lose out. Whether it's 261, whether it's APD, whether it's reopening the transatlantic, or that, for the size and scale of the industry, do you punch your weight, Ben Smith?
Look, it's been a really tough year for us, no doubt. You know, we haven't caught a break since the beginning of this crisis, but you know, it's clear that there are a lot of people that do support us, a lot of governments that do support us. They do understand the value that we bring to economies. So in a roundabout way, it is encouraging that many people understand the value that our industry brings to the globe and to individual economies. So, you know, up front, yes, it could look for many people that we cannot catch a break, but I think behind the scenes, and depending on how you look at it, we do have enormous support. And when you look at the number of people that fly each year, you can see that there's huge demand from travelers all over the place to use our mode of transport to get them from A to B.
Just to add to what Ben was saying, I do think that we have a voice, and I do think that we do achieve things as well. You know, the discussions we had and the engagement that we had, a number of people who's on this panel as well, in terms of creating a framework for the digital COVID certificate is an example that Commissioner Vălean and her colleagues has delivered upon, which I think is a great feat, that we're now looking to see that is being introduced. And then also remind yourself that when we had a discussion earlier, Richard, when I think you compared us into other organizations or what we're doing around the globe, that, you know, this is quite complex with the number of countries that we are facing with, that have different rules, different regulations, and they have different conditions and to take different viewpoints. So I think that just makes the challenge even, you know, even more, you know, clear. But I do definitely think that, you know, if it wasn't for the fact that the work and the engagement that we've had, that we wouldn't have got us to the place that we are in certain topics, that's for sure.
But I want to be a little bit more self-critical, because I think there's two things where we can get better as an industry compared to other industries and the way they raise their voice. One that was wonderfully done, I think, in that little movie we saw, Richard, before we started. We need to get the voices of our employees to be aligned with us. Sometimes it's unions, sometimes it's just the staff. But if you look at the very least successful German industry, chemical, automotive, they're so well aligned with their unions and their staff when it comes to publicly voicing their interests. I think there we can get better. Historically, airlines and airline staff have some kind of a conflict we need to get over. And the second one, I think, is, which we are also trying to do here today, to get our voices together, even though we're competing so fiercely. Our biggest competitor by far is France-KLM. But still, I think we agree on 90%, Ben, on what we need politicians, regulatory bodies to do. Maybe there's 5 or maybe there's 10%, but we don't agree. And I think A4E Airlines for Europe really was trying to solve the second item, and I think it's 5 years today. Some of us have been there from the beginning. We've come a long way, at least in Europe. Willie, I think, will strengthen IATA further. We need IATA when it comes to have a global voice. When it comes to align with our staff and our unions, I think we all individually have to find answers. We can get better there compared to best practice in other industries.
Luis, one of your opcos, BA, the latest advert, well, both the advert going into the pandemic and the commercial that you've just launched, which of course, shame it was somewhat spoiled by the Portuguese decision, but did take the staff as being the focal point of the commercial. How successful was it received?
I think it was very positive. We wanted to send a message that the employees are key for us. Also, the customer, for sure, they are in the center of all of our activities. But if we don't have the employees engaged, we are not going to provide an excellent service. That is what we want. BA has to be a premium brand. We need to be more efficient because we are sure that after this pandemic, in order to come back to the profitability levels that we have in 2019. We need to do it better. But we have the best people, and that's the message we are sending them.
Michael, the way in which the industry can speak with one voice is significant, but you are all still competitors. And this isn't the press conference from earlier. So what do you see as the competitive environment for the year ahead?
You know, I think all of us are focused on recovery. You know, we've seen our business devastated by up to 90% declines in the last 12 months. We are struggling in certain markets to get governments to give us some kind of clear leadership, most notably the UK and Ireland. Europe is moving ahead with vaccinations, with digital green certs. We need to reopen the UK-US corridor as well, because vaccinations in North America or the USA are as high as they are in Europe. So I think, if anything, I would say, you know, competitive rivalry has probably been taken a back seat for the moment while we all rebuild our schedules this summer. We have a lot of aircraft that have been grounded, a lot of pilots that haven't flown a lot. We need to get restarted safely, and then encourage passengers to come back. Like, we're selling lower fares on Ryanair than we have ever done, I'd say, for the last 8-10 summers. I'm sure all the other airlines would say similarly. We have much lower forward bookings, and therefore people are getting better value air travel across Europe into June, July, August, and September than they have had for many years. But I think all of us would say that we've seen a very strong recovery in bookings over the last 6-8 weeks, particularly focused around the second half of June, July, and August. What we need now is governments to allow that recovery to build by putting in place the digital green cert. It can be rolled out today if you're vaccinated, and by persuading other governments, most notably the UK and the Irish, is, you know, will you stop restricting vaccinated passengers because they're vaccinated? There should be a bonus or a dividend for those customers. So I think recovery is more important in 2021 than competition. But I have no doubt that into the autumn of 21, summer 22, normal intense competition between the European airlines will resume for the benefit of our customers and our destinations.
And that is crucial, Carsten, isn't it? Carsten and Ben, because the other areas where you two compete hard, along with Luis as well, so the three sort of transatlantic carriers, if I may at the moment, the reopening there, well, the UK is talking about another task force with the United States, as if we haven't already had one task force. I'd like to know how many they'd like to have to basically come to the same conclusion. Start with you, Carsten. Do you have hope that a task force that will succeed?
Well, I do have hope, as there is, while we speak, a summit going on between, obviously, the Americans and Europeans. And I can hardly imagine that this not only most important traffic area in global aviation wouldn't open up soon, but also, as we know, at least one directional, there already has been an opening basically being invited to the European Commission, and it's now individual countries which have to apply. And if I look at my own country, Germany wouldn't exist in its current state without the United States, due to our history. And to be the last one to invite Americans back in, I find it very awkward, and I don't think that position can be held very long. The other way around, Americans inviting Europeans in, we all understand, will depend a little bit on the vaccination rate in the US, because travel will be limited to vaccinated people anyway. So let's all hope that the US administration takes 4th of July, the day they rightly celebrate themselves, to also invite the world again, or at least invite Europeans.
Ben.
We got the airplanes ready as of 5th of July.
Ben. Can you hear me, Ben? Ben Smith.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
Oh, right. Actually, before you do jump in, I'm going to go back quickly to Michael. You have to go. So before you leave, what would you like to leave ringing in our ears?
I mean, I think, look, what I want is what I think all of the airlines for Europe want. We want to see an early resumption of intra-EU air travel, the removal of restrictions. The green certificate allows that to take place between now and the 1st of July. And I think there's no excuse for any EU government, and I include the UK in that, we should have restriction-free travel for vaccinated passengers commencing no later than the 1st of July. And then we can all have the prospect of a recovery this summer in our industry for our customers. And let's not forget the hundreds of thousands of jobs that we are not just directly responsible for as airlines, but the hundreds of, literally millions of jobs of which the tourism industry across Europe depends upon our passengers so that it can recover too. Can I just say too, best wishes, and apologies, I have to go early, but I have a family commitment that I can't get out of, I'm afraid. So I wish you all well and hope to see you again in person soon, so we can finally get off these godforsaken Zoom meetings.
Depends, and who we fly to see you depends on who's offering the cheapest fare. Don't answer that, Michael. Don't answer. I'm not giving you or Johan a chance, or any of you a chance to rush in. All right, Michael's gone. Back to you, Ben, in terms of the transatlantic.
Well, I'm optimistic. You know, when I see what's in place today.
Why, Ben?
Why? Because today, if you are American or anybody who lives in the US, you can come over into France, and if you're vaccinated, there are no restrictions. You can come right in. And if you are an American citizen living here in France and you want to go back to the US, you are invited. We're just waiting for European residents to be able to do the same. So there's no real logic behind the fact that your citizenship should not come into play when we're looking at the opposite direction. So we're looking for reciprocity. But I'm optimistic that now that we have it in one direction, that we should be in the other direction.
And Louis, the transatlantic BA is on its knees because of the lack of transatlantic cover. Portugal just basically kicked it even further down. And I wonder what you now want.
Yeah, I think that, as we have said, we don't see any reason why the US-UK corridor cannot be open. When you see the successful rollout of vaccines in the two countries, nothing, I think, can stop the opening. I am more optimistic after hearing the EU Justice Commissioner before about the reopening from the 1st of July. I think the meeting that and the task force that the Prime Minister Johnson and the President Biden, they are going to start, is a first step, but we need actions. We had task force before, and what we need now is to open the corridor as soon as possible. The problem is that the UK is, from my point of view, is reaching a critical point, and we need safely restart of travel. We need to reboot the UK economy. We need to protect jobs, because at the end, if we don't open this important corridor, it's going to affect the jobs of a lot of people. And I think we need to reunite families that for 9, 10 ago, they didn't have the opportunity to see each other. So for all that, and based in scientific data, I think we need to open that corridor as soon as possible.
Did we lose Richard?
Just give it 1 second, gentlemen.
Stand by. We'll get him back. He's coming back in a minute. Thanks.
Without Richard, we actually have to talk to each other. That's terrible. We lost the ability to talk to each other after all these years of sitting in our home offices and watching video conferences.
I don't know if it's the light. You look like you're on hand, Carsten.
Louis, have you heard anything from the summit yet in regard to opening? I understand the UK had a team over in Washington, but it was quite disappointing. Of course, I did my homework with the governments of our home countries about the summit, but nobody really seems to be willing to know what the Americans want. or the Americans?
We still don't have any feedback. The only thing we know is that they are trying to have a positive approach, but we are not, to be honest, sure if that's going to be real or not.
But to have this summit go by without some kind of comment on this would be very awkward, I think.
Yes.
So I can't believe this will happen. But we have been surprised so many times in this pandemic, all of us, but still.
Yes.
So I've just heard from Richard. He is trying to log back in. So if everyone can just stand by for 5 minutes, he gives his apologies and is trying to get back in.
Okay.
So, thanks, everyone.
I was just in New York 2 weeks ago. The flight going to New York had like 30 people on board. On the way back, our flight was full. So Americans are starting now to very much to Eastern Europe, not only Greece, but also the Balkan and visiting friends and family. So it was very obvious that the summer has been starting at least in one direction.
Yes.
But one thing to point out, which I think is so important when we're talking about the restrictions, is that extraordinary pent-up demand that exists. And we've seen it every time we've had a chance to actually do fly when the restrictions are lifted, and there's no doubt that people want to travel, and you're looking in other places, and you would be better equipped than myself to comment on domestic US. I think that is up to what 90% of 2019 levels. I think in part of Asia as well.
On the leisure side, yes. On the corporate side, it's way behind.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's what we've seen before. Leisure picks up, sooner than business, but it's quite extraordinary when you're looking at, how quickly it comes back when it is allowed and safe to do so.
Absolutely.
It is amazing how close in customers are willing to book for, especially long haul travel. So,
yeah.
So, Carsten, you look tanned. Have you been away?
Well, just a few days on Sardinia. We had a long weekend in Germany last week.
Okay.
So I flew to Sardinia. Saw an easyJet airplane, Johan. So you discovered that place apparently as well.
Fantastic. I hope we delivered to your very high standards of expectations.
No, I just looked at your plane. Of course, I was sitting on my own.
Next time.
Next time I go by whatever, Basel or wherever you fly.
I'm going to jump in here until Rick is able to get back online. Maybe we can take a question from the audience. People have been writing questions in the Slido, and one of the questions here is about the shift to rail. Here in Europe, it's the year of the rail, and there's a lot of discussion about investments that need to be made in rail, and in the hopes of avoiding the more polluting aviation as a mode of transport. Is rail a good alternative to aviation? Carsten, maybe you want to have a go at this one.
Well, we learned that indeed it can be an alternative when the product is right. And unfortunately in Germany, that's very limited. It's basically Cologne, Frankfurt, and Stuttgart to Frankfurt. But if I look at my friends in France, where of course the government has taken a different approach to high-speed trains, they're putting these train tracks in, allowing larger distances to also be covered. Somewhere around 2 hours, I think, is a turnover point. People are not willing to sit in the train more than 2 hours. And then I think it can be an interesting alternative. In our country, it takes 20 years to build a new high-speed train track. So it's probably like the new airplane technology. It's way out. But we indeed are trying to use that mode of transport, because these short flights with only transfer passengers on board, of course, commercially don't make much sense for us anyway. It's only trying to create a transfer product. So I think there is a future in this, but you probably need a more aggressive approach by governments to accelerate the build of high-speed trains.
But can I add to that as well? And easyJet, we don't fly a number of the shortest route that has been impacted by, for instance, the restrictions of this in France. It doesn't really impact ourselves. But there's a misunderstanding here. Sometimes you hear the narrative to say, well, actually, we need to accelerate the infrastructure projects that will include then, sufficiently and much more and greater access to high-speed rail network. That would come with an upfront huge cost on carbon emissions. huge if you're looking at what that would lead to. And if you're taking that into consideration and the actions that we have committed to when it comes to Destination 2050, that makes no sense from an environmental point of view. So I argue anybody to say that, well, actually, let's just move on to increase and build up that infrastructure to look at the cost that will be in terms of the impact on the environment. And you will see when you put that against the technologies that we're talking about on zero emission aircraft, as an example, and all the other measures that we are doing in order to reduce the impact on the environment, that a lot of that doesn't really make sense from an environmental point of view. So it's a narrative that might sound good. And also the other point to Carsten is that the network isn't as developed as some people think. I think Eurocontrol did an analysis about this in 2018. I think it was 0.4% of the demand that think that they could switch over to rail. So, you got to look through this in the detail, and it is not as easy as some people or organizations, for that matter, argue.
And here in France, there's been a build-up and a government push to invest in high-speed rail for 40 years, so it's not new. And many of the customers that used to fly domestically on airplanes have already switched to train service. What's taken place over the last year has been a push to go even further. So what France did, the government of France did, was to put heavy restrictions on airlines to either reduce or to eliminate service on when there is a train option of less than 2 hours and 30 minutes. And the pushback from leisure customers has not been that strong, but from business customers it has been. So to be seen how that plays out. But in terms of the push to rail, to have the infrastructure in place, not only is there point-to-point, but if we like to look at rail for connection traffic to long-haul networks, right now it's relatively straightforward and seamless for customers to fly from a smaller city via a hub to the long haul in terms of baggage and customs and police formalities. To do that from a train perspective is not there yet, and that would need to be put in place to ensure that customers have a good experience. So a number of approaches.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can move on to the topic of SAFs. There's been a lot of discussion in the last panel about the role of SAFs going forward. Luis, I know that IAG recently made commitments to using a certain blending mandate for SAFs for the future. Ryanair has also made such a commitment. As A4E, we have different views on this, but it is in the chat now a question about there being a lack of a uniform approach on targets for SAFs, and that it's crucial to agree on a contribution going forward. So how do we get there, Luis?
Okay, I think as you said, we have different positions here, but the IAG position is that SAF is one of the few alternatives that we have in the short term in order to achieve the objectives. As we talked before in different panels, we are investing a lot in the latest technology in new aircraft, but the other things that we can have in the short term is the single European sky and also the sustainable aviation fuels. And for that, the last 22nd of April, we announced in the group that in 2030, we will power 10% of our flights with sustainable aviation fuel. But for that, we need the commitment from the different governments, because we cannot afford that if we don't have enough sustainable aviation fuel and with a price that we can afford.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other views from any of the other CEOs? Okay.
Well, I've always taken the position when you're looking through the sustainable aviation fuels and the different alternatives within there that, of course, this is a more or less an offsetting mechanism, because what it does, it reduces the emissions over its life cycle, but it has similar characteristics as jet fuel when in use, and one has to remember that. I don't think that this is going to be a significant solution for short haul. I can see play a role in mid haul and long haul, but when it comes to the short haul, this will be quickly replaced as soon as we now starting to see the developments of hydrogen and electric. And by the way, I'm just going to make that point. And I've started talking about the hydrogen and electric, and particularly electric, some time ago, and there's been some resistance, and people have not read up well on the subject. The development there is immense. If you're only speaking to 2-3 companies within this space, there will be 1 or 2 steps that this will take time. This development is absolutely exponential. So I'm going to put much more focus and trust on that, rather than something that is clearly an offsetting mechanism that easyJet is doing 100% already in any case.
Okay, I will say goodbye again. Richard is back. Richard, I don't know what happened. Hackers, maybe?
Well, I don't know. Hello, everyone.
It's a mystery.
Perhaps a good reminder. No, somebody kicked me out. This is an interesting. Maybe Michael did it on his way out. He decided to pull the plug on the way out. I can hear that you were talking about the environment, sustainable. The discussion we had on sustainable SAFs. Fuels. I wonder the reality. Luis, everybody's doing so much work on it to get to carbon neutral, to get to 2050. But I just wonder the reality of it versus the theory and the amount of money that everybody's spending on it. It's quite enormous in your case.
Yes, as I said before, I think as a group, IAG, we have the commitment to have 10% of our flights powered by sustainable aviation fuel in 2030. But it's not only a question of us. We need the governments, we need manufacturers, we need everybody in the chain to be conscious of the reality, because right now, the percentage of sustainable aviation fuel that we are using in our flights is very low. Unless we have more plants to produce sustainable aviation fuel and with an affordable price, it's going to be impossible to arrive to those commitments. So I think we can do more things than the sustainable aviation fuel. As I said before, I think all the things that we can do to simplify the sky, to go to the single European sky, is something that can give also advantage in the short term.
Carsten, earlier at the press conference, I heard you talking about the work that you've done at Lufthansa Group on the single European skies. The only problem I find with it is that we've been talking single European skies for as long as I can remember, and there are incremental improvements, but that quantum leap to gain the real benefit doesn't seem to happen. Are you frustrated?
Oh, I'm deeply frustrated on this. But I think there's 2 new developments. One, out of this pandemic, we now received proof how much optimized air traffic control, of course, in this case, it was just optimized by less load to the system, how much that optimization really can create in terms of savings. I mentioned the number before, Frankfurt, Paris, 16% less fuel on all of our flights during the pandemic than in the years before, already calibrated for less passengers on board and less weight. So it's just the air traffic environment which allowed us to use that much less fuel. Better flight levels, shorter approaches. So there is at least those famous 10% in the system, we believe. And secondly, I said that before, I see the commissioners on the call. Historically, this was all about saving time or money for passengers and the industry. Now it's about the environment. So I think we have a totally new way of communicating the advantages, the need for advantages for a single European sky, because it's not for money anymore, it's for the environment, which is a much higher valued currency in these days. And also, I think for me, since we are more or less among ourselves, the single European sky and also the compensation for passengers, which we allow them to do, is also helping us to turn around the debate. If politicians are telling me we should do even more, then I can always tell them, if you don't even do that little homework of single European sky, how can you dare to say the industry has to say do more? Passengers, we allow compensation of passengers CO2s all the way to 100% with SAF. It's less than 1%. So there must be even all the journalists who are writing about our industry not being environmental focused enough must be more than those less than 1% passengers who don't compensate. I think it helps.
I wonder,
which is important.
I wonder whether you're onto something there, Carsten, in that the industry has sort of provided, Johan and Ben, has made its case, but the politicians haven't listened, or if they have listened, they haven't reacted, because this is the 5th anniversary of A4E. And I seem to remember at that first press conference, Single European Skies was very much part of our debating issue. So, Johan, where do you go next on this to get that message across?
Well, it's a very good point. I mean, there's a number of times when we discuss, and not only myself and people on these panels with decision makers, when you're going through and you talk about data, and you talk about, for instance, the fact that the aviation, is responsible for 2.4% of the carbon emissions around the world. And we know that the public opinion is that it is more than that. And sometimes you're getting in a debate where people will say, well, this is what people want. Well, this is what people think. And I always thought about it that, the governments and EU, and any decision maker also has the responsibility to also lead, provide transparent facts about what actually works. You take taxation as an example. We talked about earlier in one of the conversations that taxation is being proven to be pretty useless when it comes to reducing the footprint on the environment for aviation. There's no case for that at all. But what we haven't discussed enough is to say that, look, and this comes as proposed from well-intended, well-meaning organizations, I'm sure, to think that, well, let's then work on taxation so it suppresses demand. Well, what it will do, it will suppress demand for the people who are not rich, who are not wealthy, who are not privileged, and it will turn the clock back, before the deregulation of the industry. And I don't think people have really caught eye on this. That means that it's not necessarily going to be less flights taking place. There will be fewer people on those flights, and rich people and privileged people can afford to do that. And I think when you have those arguments, I can see that there's a light bulb switching up to say, well, actually, if we are introducing taxation as part of suppressing demand, we are driving more inequality, it's more divisive, and it's questionable what it's doing in terms of decarbonizing the sector.
Okay, let me do a quick number. In 2019, Carsten, how many passengers did you fly?
142 million.
Right, Luis, maximum number.
118 million.
Ben?
I think we flew about 105 million.
Johan?
95.
So we'll round it up 100. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nearly 500 million passengers across you all. Now that's 500 million opportunities to get a message across. And I'm wondering, Ben, whether the industry is taking sufficient opportunity of using the passengers as your proxies on this message.
No, I think it's a great point. Like if I go, if I look at another challenge in our industry, we've got 85,000 employees, and the amount of pressure they put on management to be responsible from an environmental perspective and to send us their ideas. It's been really great to see. They want to work for an industry which they can be proud. They want to work for a company that is responsible. So to see a new big collective push, something new, I think it'd be great if we could get our customers to do something similar. I've been really pleasantly surprised.
Final thoughts. Start with you, Luis, because you're I think you're the newest in terms of the top job. Has the crisis aged you, and what do you think you've learned about the crisis, about handling crisis?
Okay, I think it was not the best time to join this new role. But I think first of all, we needed to survive in this difficult environment. So we did a lot of activities that are not usual for us to raise money, to reduce the cost. I think I knew before that I learned that in situations like this, the teams, not the teams to do meetings, the team is important. And I think we have changed a lot of concepts that we had before, and we have changed ourselves even, because I think now we have realized that some boundaries can be removed. Boundaries, for example, remote working, something that we have realized that is something that is there. But also, I think it has changed some priorities for us, like health, for example. We knew that it was a priority, but now health is very important. Freedom, and freedom is linked to aviation, the possibility to travel. And we have seen that the importance of small things like a hug or to give a kiss to your parents or to whoever you want to give a kiss. So I think all these things that we have learned.
Ben, have you learned the importance of sleep, of which I'm sure there was a great lack of at various points over the last year?
Most definitely, but good sleep, deep good sleep is if it's quality sleep, yes. I think in the beginning, all of us were in a shock, and we never expected that this crisis would take so long. But as it sunk in, and we, at least personally, realized that this was not going to go away in the short term. It's a new environment. Not being able to leave your residence, not being able to go into a restaurant, and obviously not being able to take flights. So I think I'll echo what Luis said, is you really get reminded of what some of the most important things are in your life, and face-to-face meetings, for whatever reason, are extremely important, and this gives me great optimism for our future. That's not going to disappear. As I personally, my parents live in Australia, and I can't wait to go see them.
Carsten, this idea of face-to-face meetings, there is this strange view that we will all be using Zoom and this for the rest of our lives, and that business travel it has gone for good. I don't believe it, and I don't think you do either.
No, I don't share that. As Johan said earlier today, we do believe, and we even see that corporate travel recovers slower. So I think that's a fact. And I do believe there's some meetings which might be replaced. If it's 10%, 5%, we said maximum 20 in our forecast. And we all know there's growth in our industry, not that much in Europe, but other parts of the world. So eventually the growth will outpace that potential shrinking element. So I think there was a different view probably half a year ago on this than there is even now. I think there's a curve of, we all learned how to do video conferencing, we all learned the efficiency of this tool, but we very soon were on the backside of the curve and learned the downside. So I don't know if it's 5%, 10, 12, there will be some impact. It will not change the way we do business.
Which is a good message in a way. Johan, you get the last word. You're the chair of A4E before we hand it back to Thomas, which is a good thing, isn't it? You lost sleep over the year. I think you've probably got a few grey hairs. All of us have, frankly, than we had at the beginning. Some even might have fewer hairs than they had at the beginning. But we're all we're still standing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I can just echo, what my colleagues on the panel has said as well. But I give you an example. It was the first time I flew in a long time last week. I went to Lisbon to do a base visit there, and this was just a couple of days before then the UK government came up with this irrational decision of putting Portugal back into the amber camp. And what a revelation. To meet your team, to meet your people, and I just realized how much I had missed that, face-to-face engagement, and went out speaking to the customers at the check-in as well. And I just thought that what a reminder it is when you realize how many people actually has gone into this amazing industry because they love that type of environment, and I think that was a fantastic thing to be able to do again.
Thank you, one and all, for joining us. I apologize again that I had to leave you. Thomas, I'm going to bring back Thomas, the head of A4E. And as I do, Thomas, I reflect. This morning I had my 30th PCR test. I had that 30th PCR test so that I can transfer in London whilst I'm fully vaccinated, so I can go back to the United States where I need only an antigen test, which my PCR will be out of date by the time I get back. So I'm going tonight, tomorrow morning, to do an antigen test in this room, which will be watched online, so I get a digital certificate so I can get back home to the United States. Whew. And that's just one trip of at least a dozen that I've made during pandemic. So I hand it back to you. I thank all the CEOs, and I say, please God, if you invite me next year for the 6th, I'll be there in person, and the CEOs can pay the bill.
Thank you very much. Big thanks to thanks to all of you. Yeah, broken the chair. Send us the invoice, Richard. Thanks to all of you for an exciting debate, very lively debate, both virtually and non-virtually, and thanks for bearing with us, even with the technical glitches. So Richard, many thanks again for being with us, and I'll take you up on the offer for next year. We'll be more than happy to host you in a real summit, a face-to-face summit, rather than a virtual summit. I very much liked also you really made the best of this in virtual environment with your excellent interviews, even the recorded ones. I mean, to the extent that we actually spotted some comments from people from the audience who were really surprised how you could change suits so quickly. So even your recorded interviews really came across as very live. So thanks for that. It was a great job as always. Very well done. And again, thanks. We'll hope to see you next year. And yes, we will make sure that you will fly comfortably, and hopefully you'll be able to get through with less paperwork next time. So thanks again, and safe returns from Croatia to New York. We'll see you very soon. Our next and final keynote for today is Commissioner Vălean, who has been listening in, I've seen quite a while during the CEO debate, which is great because she will be providing the final and closing remarks for this event. Madam Commissioner, welcome, a formal welcome to our summit. Appreciate that you have been able to make yourself available with us live today, which is not always a given your very busy agenda. Apart from the fact that we appreciate at A4E you as being very keenly interested in aviation, we have also enjoyed your support for the last couple of years. And then personally, I think that aviation could use more role models for women in aviation, like yourself, Commissioner. So we try very hard at the A4E team in terms of gender balance. My impression is that after all these years I've also spent in aviation, is that we still have a lot of work to do to get to more gender balance in our sector. That's just a side note, but thank you very much again for being with us, Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Well, I thank you for inviting me for the closing remarks, even though the debate we have usually, it never ends, because we have so many things ahead of us. We are not out of the woods yet. We have to look at the future. So the partnership between the European Commission and your organization, it's a very important one, and envisages a continuous conversation. So just for today, some closing remarks. Of course, I was listening in. It's always very interesting for me, especially when you go through so many topics which are very important in the current debate, political debate, and also economical debate inside Europe. And of course, from the very beginning, congratulations on your 5th birthday. I'm also eager to participate in the anniversary of 6, probably in person, because I hope by the next year all these restrictions would be of the past. While talking about crisis, we are unfortunately 15 months into this crisis for the sector. And while everyone knows the figures, they do not cease to amaze me. I mean, it is unprecedented. It is not a usual cyclic economic downturn. It was a crisis that hit the core of personal freedoms that we cherish in EU, to move, to travel, to work, provide services across the continent. This is one of most significant advantages, and this has been put at a severe test. From one extreme to another, we clearly saw the need for more efficiency, flexibility, and resilience. And I know you know them, but let me say them again, that in the Eurocontrol's recently updated forecast, in 2021, European traffic may recover to only 50% of 2019 levels. And even with the interregional restrictions lifted in the first quarter next year, the traffic is forecast to return to 2019 levels only in 2025. And this says a lot. And this says a lot, and I've listened very carefully, and all of you are focused on recovery, reopening of the travel, all the restrictions which have been put in place and which deter the appetite of people to book or to travel because of the myriads of foreseen restrictions. And you know very well that one of my main objectives from the very beginning was to try to reach an harmonized approach from the member states in terms of travel. And now, some time after all the measures we have put in place and the conversation we had in the network with member states to try to make them have a joint approach, we can say, for example, that the passenger locator forms are now with the exchange platform and with the legal base available for member states to exchange data on a unified way. We expect to be used in time for the summer traveling season also. I'm giving you this example because from the very beginning I said if everyone starts developing its own product, this is going to be burdensome for such already for the sector, which is already very much impacted. You have discussed previously today with my colleague Reynders and among yourselves, so you know very well the situation now with the digital COVID certificate. Of course, I am very eager to see and support you in developing the practical implementation of this. I know that you have discussed a lot about resuming travel with third countries. And I would say here that having a unified EU certificate for the three purposes mentioned several times, it would be a great opportunity to have an understanding with third countries of recognition of such type of certificates, which would ease up again all the proceedings and the access of people coming from outside the EU, but also for Europeans to go in these third countries. Talking about passenger rights, I know your concerns about the regulation 261 from 2004. We must pursue work on this regulation in order to update the air passenger rights, in particular in the context of the pandemic. It still provides a basis on which to boost popular confidence in the industry and thus to help restore air travel. It is for the next European presidencies of the Council to put the file back on the agenda. Well, clearly the reimbursement issue associated with the COVID crisis is not yet over. We thus continue the dialogue with the member states, mainly through the consumer protection arm we have to ensure that rules are respected. One of the most important topics we had during this pandemic was the slots issue. On slots, you know that we acted quickly at the beginning, and with a waiver. It was an emergency measure, but the waiver, apart from the relief offered to the airlines, has also unintended negative consequences on competition. So it's clear that the air traffic is not going to recover to pre-pandemic levels. So we cannot expect you to operate the normal 80% of the slots series. So since we have the possibility through the amended regulation to give further relief from the normal slot rules, we will adopt probably a delegated act to set a new slot use threshold for the winter of 21-22. We are currently gathering data and trying to monitor how air traffic develops. We exchange regularly, as you know, with the stakeholders. So at this stage, I cannot say when the 80-20 rule should apply again. It was discussed on when it came to decarbonization and the futures of sustainability of the sector. One topic which is the no-brainer is the air traffic management. So the CES 2+ proposal, you know that I was very keen in pushing this proposal. It's very important for me, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So if we cannot do at least this one, what we are talking about here. So well, I'm hearing a lot of the member states talking about sustainability, reducing the footprint of economic activities, their commitments towards. It is very frustrating when I see that they cannot commit on something which is that simple as modernizing the air traffic management. And I'm talking about modernizing in an age in which we should talk about innovation and new technologies. And so this is a sector which is so way behind. So, well, at least last week we have had this Transport Minister Council, and they agreed on a general approach, which I would say it's not ambitious enough, but I really hope that they will take a more bold stand towards this, and they will do the right thing to support our proposal, which is actually absolutely needed, not only in terms of congestion, as someone pointed out earlier, or in costs, or in time for passengers, but it's also very important for environmental purposes, as it was already pointed out. You know, we are preparing this Fit for 55 package to reduce with 55% the emissions overall, and each transport mode has to play its part. From our perspective in transport, we are proposing something on alternative fuels in aviation, maritime, and also for the infrastructure for these alternative fuels. So you will find something for yourself in alternative fuels for aviation and in the infrastructure directive, alternative fuels infrastructure directive. I know, and I'm very pleased to see that sustainable alternative fuel is a pillar of decarbonization, also in your commitment, Destination 2050. I think this remains an essential sectoral contribution to the decarbonization. You know very well that the idea we had behind, because I heard you so many times since I took this mandate as Commissioner for Transport, I heard you well when you said, okay, we are willing to do so, but there is not enough volume on the market. So our approach is to create through demand the markets to move and provide an increase in available alternative fuels. I can tell you that I see movements with one or another from various member states and industries. So only the conversation about it, it's already creating, I would say, in the market some movement. Our approach will be a balanced one. I hope you'll find it this way, because it was deep, very carefully assessed to strike the right balance between what is possible and what should be the ambition. This is about alternative fuel. Then, of course, it comes the EU ETS, which is not directly a transport file, but it is of relevance for your sector. The overall emission cap is announced to be significantly reduced for the same purpose of achieving the 55% reduction for 2030. What I'm looking at and I'm trying to understand and support is to assess the speed, how fast to reduce fuel allowances to carriers. And you know very well the argument being that you are in a global competitiveness challenge. So we have to take this into account when we talk about the EU hubs and potential risks to feeder flights. Then we are of course looking at CORSIA as part of the ETS directive. I remain on the opinion that we have to act globally, and this is the only instrument we have, and we have to show that we fulfill our commitments so that we are going to implement this as long as we support it at global level. And secondly, an important argument is that only being part of a system, you can assess it and push it from the inside to become relevant. So this is my answer to those who are saying CORSIA is not ambitious enough. But we will have our own system, but at least we need to be part of the global one in order to influence it. You know very well that also the revision on the Energy Tax Directive will be part of the work stream in Fit for 55. Part of this probably it will be the tax exemptions will be addressed, including for aviation fuels, and how this should evolve. Well, I am on the opinion that we have to look for your sector at a basket of measures, that we should not bet only on one, and find a right balance between them, not to overlap and double tax. I liked some of the comments you have made. You know, we had on several occasions various conversation about the role of taxation versus decarbonization, and it's true that if part of the taxes would go back into innovation, into the sector, it will be very much welcome, and it can play a role to actually achieve the objective, because you have to keep in mind the objective is not to increase the prices, the objective is to decarbonize. So this is something I'm very well understanding, and I'm trying to support an approach in which all the measures will keep in mind this objective, which is reducing the carbon footprint and not other intentions. These are some of my thoughts. I enjoyed, as always, listening to you and your issues. And I can assure you that you have in myself and in European Commission a partner to try to preserve the importance, the societal role, economic role of your industry, the competitiveness of it, and to support it, because we absolutely need it. And I would go against anyone who says that we need to deter flying. We just need to fly as much as possible, but in a better way, in a better world, with advantages for everyone who is part of this wonderful world. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm looking forward for the next opportunity.
Commissioner, and we'll take you up on your offer to continue to work with you on CES and the Fit for 55 package in particular, two very hot issues for the next couple of months. So we're looking forward to increasing our work with you and your services. And thank you also for the encouraging words, the kind words that you have for us, and your continued support, as I mentioned at the beginning, is very much appreciated. So we're looking forward to seeing you soon to continue our debate. Before we close, I would like to make a couple of final remarks, not wanting to summarize everything, but just to look back at the headlights of today's summit. First of all, of course, remember Commissioner Reynders' intervention, who underlined the EU digital COVID certificate's importance, the importance of it as a binding regulation, which is now the right tool to restore freedom of movement and to reopen EU borders eventually, but also with third countries, like with the US, which was mentioned a couple of times also, including by Michael. He also stressed the Commission's view that if a person is vaccinated, it must be possible to travel without any additional measures. Also, Guillaume Faury, CEO of Airbus, gave us some interesting views. We heard how his airline customers have faced an extremely difficult time the last year. We know, but that was just again confirmed. But together, suppliers and customers, airlines, we are able to find common solutions that are manageable for all parties during the crisis. We also heard from Guillaume about the mega trend of sustainability and global warming continuing to put pressure on all of us within the industry, but aviation has not reduced its ambition. He also made it very clear, nor its speed when it comes to the environment. Very important also to note Airbus's commitment to deliver its first hydrogen plane by 2035. As you may know, that's also part of our Destination 2050 report. Then thirdly, the very interesting panel from our colleagues from Boeing and GE, where they ensured that today and tomorrow they make the necessary improvements to facilitate the uptake of sustainable aviation fuels, electrofuels, and hydrogen. That's very good to know. And that in the meantime, all OEMs recognize that the communication challenges the sector is facing are huge, and the difficulty it has to talk about continuous improvements in front of a very large public, which is very impatient to see action to address climate change now. There was also exciting news and breakthrough on the technology front in the near future, and as airlines will certainly keep a close eye on that. In terms of the CEO debate, where we had a bit of a technical glitch with Richard falling out towards the end, it was clear that we need coordinated action between governments within the EU and the global level to restore travelers' confidence as vaccination continues to roll out, and the third wave is receding. Also, another important point was the implementation of the COVID certificate, again, the digital certificate, and lifting of restrictions for vaccinated travelers, that is key. Also, another point, millions of jobs are depending on it. The US-EU corridor is highly important and needs to be restarted. It was mentioned several times, and we hope to see an announcement, of course, by the way, at the upcoming summit on the 15th, Council Summit on the 15th of June, next week. Our CEOs also made clear, I believe, that the crisis has not impacted our commitment towards sustainability, and we stand behind Destination 2050. We now need governments to do their part, so we need a partnership. On EU 261, legislation is not fit for purpose. It wasn't fit for purpose already before the pandemic. I think it was Ben who mentioned that, and COVID-19 crisis only made this very clear, or even clearer. We need a swift revision of the EU rules. Following point is that we need to keep working together as a sector, and I'm delighted also to see that our member CEOs recognize A4E as a good platform to do so. Finally, before I conclude on the main headlines of the summit, is that according to the summit poll we did now today with the audience, restoring passenger confidence is considered the key priority for travelers, for passengers, for all of us. And so with us, we hope that you can hop on an aircraft this summer to visit your friends and beloved ones and your relatives. And for us, it's clear that this is not only as A4E, but as an airline and aviation community, this is something we need to work towards and continue to restore that passenger confidence. I hope that you've enjoyed the summit. We look forward to seeing you, every one of you, in person, hopefully next year. That will certainly resolve the IT problems. Events are always a challenge, as you know. But last but not least, I'd like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, without whom today's event would not have been possible. So many thanks to our A4E members, Airbus, Boeing, and GE, who shared with us some short videos now, which we'd like to play before we completely drop off. And I will stop speaking here. We'll be watching the videos, and then we will close the event. Have a great evening and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.